The rifle barrel pressed cold against Maria Hernandez's temple as she crouched behind the fallen pine, her breath coming in ragged gasps that clouded the mountain air. Through the thick forest, she could hear Edward Mitchell's boots crunching through the underbrush, methodical and patient as a hunter tracking wounded prey. Her wedding dress, once white as fresh snow, now hung in tatters around her bleeding legs. "Maria," Edward's voice carried through the trees, deceptively gentle. "You know you can't run forever. These mountains will kill you long before I have to." She pressed her back harder against the rough bark. 3 days since she'd become his mail-order bride, shipped from her family's failing farm in Texas to this remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies. 3 days of learning what kind of man answered advertisements for wives in newspapers. The bruises on her ribs throbbed with each shallow breath. Her left eye remained swollen shut from where his fist had connected when she'd tried to refuse his advances on their wedding night. The memory of his hands, rough and demanding, made her stomach lurch. A branch snapped somewhere to her left. Edward was circling, cutting off her escape routes with the patience of a man who knew these woods like his own heartbeat. Maria clutched the stolen rifle tighter, though she'd never fired a gun in her life. "I know you took my Winchester," he called, his voice closer now. "But we both know you don't have the spine to use it. Come out now, and maybe I'll go easy on you." Maria's jaw clenched. She'd seen the belt, seen the way he laid it out on their bed with deliberate ceremony. Thick leather, worn smooth from use. She'd counted 12 notches carved into the buckle and wondered what they represented. The forest around her seemed to pulse with hidden dangers. Every shadow could conceal Edward's approach. She'd been running for hours, following what she hoped was a game trail deeper into the wilderness. But the terrain grew more treacherous with each step. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was returning to that cabin, to Edward's hands in his belt, and his whispered promises of what he'd do to wives who didn't know their place. A twig snapped behind her. Maria spun, raising the rifle, but saw only empty forest. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain Edward could hear it. She had to move. Staying in one place meant death, either from Edward's hands or from the approaching mountain cold. Maria forced herself to stand, ignoring the protest from her injured leg where she'd fallen earlier. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The game trail wound higher up the mountainside, becoming little more than a deer path that disappeared entirely in places. Maria stumbled over exposed roots, caught herself against tree trunks, felt thorns tear fresh wounds in her already damaged skin. "You're bleeding, Maria." His voice drifted through the trees. "I can smell it. The scent will draw predators once night falls. Bears, mountain lions. Things that'll make what I have planned seem merciful." She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. He was right about the bleeding. She could feel it trickling down her legs, leaving a trail any competent tracker could follow. The path crested a ridge, and Maria found herself looking down into a narrow valley. Smoke rose from a chimney somewhere below, barely visible through the dense forest. Another cabin, isolated and remote as Edward's, but perhaps inhabited by someone who wouldn't immediately drag her back to her husband. She started down the slope, half running, half sliding on the loose earth. The rifle banged against her leg with each step, a constant reminder of the weapon she carried but didn't know how to use. The descent proved treacherous. Maria's feet, already torn and bleeding from running barefoot through the forest, found no purchase on the steep slope. She slid more than walked, grabbing at branches and rocks to slow her fall. Halfway down the slope, her foot caught in a hidden root. She pitched forward, unable to catch herself, and tumbled the remaining distance in a tangle of torn fabric and flailing limbs. She came to rest against a fallen log, the rifle spinning away into the underbrush. For a moment, she couldn't move. Every part of her body screamed in protest. Above her, Edward's voice called out, closer than before. "I heard that, Maria. Sounded painful. Why don't you save us both some trouble and just stay put?" She forced herself to move, crawling toward where the rifle had landed. Her fingers closed around the barrel just as she heard boots on the slope above. Edward had found her trail. The cabin smoke seemed closer now, perhaps a quarter mile through the dense forest. Maria struggled to her feet, using the rifle as a makeshift crutch, and stumbled toward what she hoped was salvation. The forest here felt different, older somehow. The trees grew larger, their trunks massive and ancient, their canopies so thick it blocked most of the remaining daylight. Moss hung from the branches like funeral shrouds. Maria pushed through a curtain of low-hanging branches and found herself in a small clearing. The cabin sat at its center, larger than Edward's, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. She approached cautiously, the rifle held ready despite her inexperience. The front door stood slightly ajar, and she could hear movement inside, the soft sounds of someone going about their daily routine. "Hello?" she called, her voice cracking from thirst and exhaustion. "Please, I need help." The humming stopped. Footsteps approached the door, slow and measured. Maria raised the rifle, not knowing whether she faced friend or foe. The door opened fully and a man stepped into view. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of winter sky. His clothes were simple but well-made. Most importantly, his hands were empty, and his expression showed concern rather than threat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't place, "you look like you've been through hell." Maria kept the rifle trained on him, though her arms shook with exhaustion. "Stay back. I don't want trouble, but I'll use this if I have to." The man raised his hands slowly, showing his palms. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is John Parker. This is my home, and you're welcome here." His eyes took in her torn dress, her bleeding legs, her bruised face. "Who did this to you?" Before she could answer, Edward's voice echoed through the forest, much closer now. "Maria, I know you're down there. Come out, and we'll go home. Fight me, and you'll regret it." John Parker's expression hardened, his winter blue eyes fixed on something beyond Maria's shoulder, and she saw his jaw clench. "Your husband?" Maria nodded, not trusting her voice. The rifle wavered in her grip. "How long since you ate?" he asked. "3 days," she whispered. John stepped back from the doorway, gesturing toward the interior of his cabin. "Come inside. We'll figure this out together." Maria hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her not to trust another man, not after Edward. But exhaustion was winning the battle against caution. "How do I know you won't just hand me back to him?" she asked. John's expression grew grim. "Because no man worth the name would do what's been done to you." Edward's voice came again, closer still. "I can see the smoke from your chimney, stranger. Send out my wife, and we'll have no trouble between us." John stepped fully outside. "The lady's under my protection now. You'd best move along." "She's my wife, legally bought and paid for. I've got papers." "Papers don't give you the right to beat a woman half to death." Edward's laugh was cold and ugly. "You don't know what you're getting into, mountain man. That woman is mine, and I'll have her back." John turned to Maria. "Can you shoot that rifle?" She shook her head. "I've never fired a gun." "Then put it down before you hurt yourself. If shooting starts, stay inside and keep low." Maria wanted to protest, but she recognized the wisdom in John's words. She leaned the weapon against the cabin wall and stepped through the doorway into warmth and safety. The interior was a revelation after Edward's Spartan dwelling. Books lined one wall, their leather spines worn from use. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls decorated with artifacts and photographs. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee. "Sit," John said, gesturing toward a chair near the fireplace. "There's stew in the pot and coffee on the stove." Through the open door, Maria could see him standing in the clearing, his hands loose at his sides but ready. Edward emerged from the tree line moments later, his own rifle held ready. "There she is," Edward snarled, catching sight of Maria through the doorway. "Come out here, wife. We're going home." "She's not going anywhere with you," John replied calmly. Edward raised his rifle, pointing it at John's chest. "I'll kill you where you stand, stranger." "Funny thing about belonging," John said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Seems to me a person ought to have some say in the matter. The law says different. She's my wife, bought and paid for. Your law doesn't run up here in the mountains." Edward's finger moved to the trigger. My rifle does. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Maria barely saw it. John moved like lightning, diving to one side as Edward's rifle cracked. The bullet splintered wood from the cabin's doorframe. Before Edward could work the bolt for another shot, John had rolled behind a fallen log and drawn his own weapon. You missed, John called out. I won't. Edward scrambled for cover behind a large pine, his face pale with sudden understanding. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't facing a man who moved like a professional gunfighter. You don't know what you're protecting, Edward shouted. That woman is worthless. Damaged goods. Seems to me the only broken thing here is you, John replied. A real man doesn't need to beat a woman to feel strong. Edward's rifle cracked again, the bullet scoring bark from the log where John sheltered. The return shot came instantly, John's pistol barking once. Edward cried out, You shot me. Edward's voice was high with pain and outrage. Just winged you, John called back. Next one won't be so generous. Take your bleeding self back down the mountain. This isn't over. She's my wife, and I'll have her back. Only if she wants to go, and something tells me that's not likely. Maria heard Edward crashing through the forest, his retreat marked by curses and threats that grew fainter with distance. John appeared in the doorway, his pistol still drawn. He's gone, John said, finally holstering his weapon. For now. He'll come back, Maria whispered. Men like Edward always come back. John closed the door and barred it with a heavy wooden beam. Maybe, but not tonight. Tonight you're safe. Safe. The word felt foreign. Maria couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly safe. Why, she asked. Why did you help me? John moved to the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. Because it was the right thing to do. He handed her one of the cups. And because I know what it's like to run from something that wants to destroy you. What were you running from? The war, mostly, and what it made me into. John settled into the chair across from her. I was a different man before Antietam. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle. Maria felt some of the tension leave her shoulders for the first time in days. What will you do now? John asked eventually. It was the question Maria had been avoiding. I don't know. I can't go back to my family, and I can't stay married to Edward. That's dangerous thinking for a woman alone. The truth of his words settled over her like a cold blanket. A woman without family or husband was vulnerable in ways that men could never fully understand. Then what do you suggest? She asked. John was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. You could stay here. For a while at least, until you figure out what comes next. Maria looked up sharply, searching his face for any sign of predatory interest. But John's expression remained neutral, almost businesslike. I don't understand, she said carefully. It's simple enough. You need a place to stay, and I could use the help. This cabin gets lonely in the winter months, and there's more work than one person can handle. You're talking about a business arrangement. I'm talking about survival. Yours and mine, in different ways. Maria set down her coffee cup. And you'd expect nothing else, no. Other duties? John's jaw tightened. I'm not Edward Mitchell. I don't take what isn't freely given. The words carried such conviction that Maria felt some of her fear ease. What kind of work? Everything that needs doing, hunting, fishing, preserving meat, tending a garden, gathering herbs, maintaining the cabin, preparing for winter. I don't know anything about living in the wilderness. You'll learn, I did. Maria considered the offer, weighing it against her limited alternatives. She could try to make her way to the nearest town. She could attempt to return to her family. She could try to disappear entirely. Or she could stay here in this warm cabin with this scarred man who'd risked his life to protect her. How do I know you won't change your mind? She asked. John stood and walked to a wooden chest in the corner. He returned with a small leather journal and a pencil. We'll write it down, he said. Terms and conditions, clear as we can make them. Something binding that we can both refer to if there's confusion later. The idea struck Maria as both practical and revolutionary. A written document would give her something to hold on to, something that acknowledged her as an equal party to the arrangement. What would it say? She asked. John opened the journal to a blank page. That's up to both of us. What do you need to feel safe here? Maria thought carefully. I need my own space. A room with a door that locks from the inside. I need the right to leave if I choose. I need your word that you won't try to force physical intimacy. John wrote as she spoke. What else? I need to know what happens if Edward comes back. Will you protect me? I'll protect you, John said without hesitation. That's not negotiable. He added that to the document. Now, what I need from you, fair share of the work as you're able, honesty about your capabilities, respect for my property and my privacy, and your word that you won't steal from me or betray my location. Who would wish you harm? The war made enemies as well as scars. There are men who'd like to see me hang for what I did in uniform. Maria nodded understanding. They were both running from their pasts. What happens if one of us wants to end the arrangement? 2 weeks' notice, unless there's immediate danger. John turned the journal toward her. Read it over. Make sure it says what you want it to say. Maria read through the terms carefully, surprised by how fair they seemed. It was more respect than she'd ever received from any man. It looks good, she said. Then we'll both sign it. John signed his name with a flourish, then handed her the pencil. Maria wrote her own name beneath his. The act felt momentous. There, John said, closing the journal. Partners? Partners, Maria agreed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The sound reminded Maria of how exposed she'd been just hours earlier. Now she sat in warmth and safety, with a full belly and a roof over her head. John showed her to a small bedroom with a door that locked from the inside. He'd left a basin of water and clean cloths for her to tend her wounds, along with a simple nightgown. Whose was this? She asked. My sister's. She visited once, left some things behind when she went back east. Maria waited until she heard John's bedroom door close, then barred her own door and began cleaning her wounds. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself for the first time since her escape. The woman looking back was almost unrecognizable, but her eyes still held life, still held hope. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to truly rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Maria Hernandez was alive, free, and protected. Maria woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her body tensing for Edward's rough hands. Then memory returned, bringing relief and uncertainty. She dressed quickly in her torn wedding dress and emerged to find John already cooking breakfast. Morning, and he said, sleep well? Better than I have in months, Maria admitted. We need to talk about practical matters, John said, sliding a plate in front of her. Starting with clothes. You can't work in a wedding dress. I don't have anything else. My sister left more than just the nightgown. There's a trunk with dresses, work clothes, boots. After breakfast, John led her to a storage room. The trunk contained neatly folded garments, all practical and well-made. Help yourself to whatever you needed, he said. I'll be outside chopping wood. Maria selected a brown wool dress and sturdy boots, then changed. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the bedraggled bride. In her place stood a woman dressed for work. She found John behind the cabin, splitting logs. He paused when he saw her, nodding approval. Better, he said. Now you look like you belong here. What do you want me to do, she asked. First, let me show you around. John led her on a tour, pointing out the vegetable garden, the root cellar, the smokehouse, the chicken coop, and the small barn. Everything was well-maintained and efficiently organized. Water comes from the spring up the hill, he explained. Garden needs weeding, and the chickens need feeding. Winter's not far off, and we need to be ready. Where do we start? Chickens first. The chicken coop housed a dozen hens and one proud rooster. John showed her how to scatter feed, how to collect eggs without getting pecked. They're good layers, he said. Eggs are protein we can count on through the winter. Maria found herself enjoying the work. She collected 8 eggs, placing them carefully in the basket. Not bad for a first try, he said. They moved on to the garden, where Maria learned to distinguish weeds from vegetables, how to harvest without damaging the plants. The work was harder than it looked, requiring her to bend and stretch in ways that made her injured body protest. You're pushing too hard, John observed after an hour. You're still healing. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're hurt and exhausted. The words stung, but Maria recognized the truth. Her ribs ached. Her legs trembled with fatigue. I need to prove I can do this, Shah said. You don't need to prove anything to me. I already know you can do it, or I wouldn't have made the offer. How could you know that? Because you survived 3 days with a man like Edward Mitchell. Because you had the courage to run when running meant probable death. Maria felt tears prick at her eyes. When had anyone ever seen strength in her? Come on, he said gently. Let's get some food in you, and then you can rest. I don't want to rest. I want to work. Part of working is knowing when to stop. They returned to the cabin where John prepared lunch. Maria ate hungrily, surprised by how much the morning's work had increased her appetite. Tell me about your sister, she said. Catherine. She's younger than me, married to a banker in Philadelphia. She worries about me living up here. After lunch, John insisted she rest. Maria wanted to protest, but her body overruled her pride. She lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes, and woke hours later to the sound of John preparing dinner. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long. You needed it. Healing takes energy. Dinner was rabbit stew with vegetables from the garden. As they ate, John outlined the next day's tasks and began teaching her about mountain life. Weather's everything up here, he explained. You learn to read the signs, to prepare for what's coming. Will you teach me? She asked. I'll teach you everything you need to know to survive up here. As evening settled, Maria helped John with the evening chores. The work was becoming familiar already. John, she said as they finished up, thank you for everything. Thank me by becoming the partner I need you to be. I will, Maria promised. The next few days fell into a natural pattern. Maria woke at dawn with John, helped prepare breakfast, and then spent the morning learning new aspects of mountain life. She mastered collecting eggs, learned to identify edible plants, and began understanding the complex process of preserving food for winter. Her body began to heal, the bruises fading, the cuts scabbing over. More importantly, her spirit began to heal as well. The constant tension that had defined her life with Edward slowly ebbed away. John proved to be a patient teacher, never criticizing her mistakes, but always showing her better ways to accomplish each task. He treated her as an equal partner, asking her opinion on decisions. Winter's going to be hard, he said one evening as they sat by the fire mending clothes. Harder than you've ever experienced. The snow can get 10 feet deep, and there are weeks when you can't leave the cabin at all. How do you stand the isolation, Maria asked. Books help, work helps, and now I'll have company for the first time in years. The comment was casual, but Maria caught something in his tone that suggested he was looking forward to that company more than he wanted to admit. John, she said carefully, what happens if our feelings change? What happens if one of us starts wanting more than partnership? He looked up from the harness he was mending. I suppose we'd have to talk about it honestly. Figure out if there's a way to change the arrangement that works for both of us. And if there isn't, then we'd honor the original agreement, 2 weeks' notice, and whoever wants to leave is free to go. The questions became more urgent a week later when Edward returned. Maria was hanging laundry when she heard the horses approaching. 3 riders, moving with purpose. She dropped the wet shirt and ran for the cabin. John, she called as she burst through the door. He's back. Edward's back, and he's brought help. John set down the rifle he'd been cleaning and moved to the window. 3 of them. Edward and 2 others, both armed. What do we do? We stick to our agreement. You're under my protection. John checked his weapons methodically, his movements calm and professional. Maria, Edward's voice carried across the clearing. Come out here, wife. Time to come home. John opened the door and stepped outside, his rifle held ready. Thought we settled this last time, Mitchell. Edward sat his horse with 2 companions flanking him. One was a large man with a deputy's badge, the other a thin fellow with the look of a hired gun. This is Deputy Marshal Tom Bradley, Edward called out. I've got legal papers saying that woman is my wife. The deputy urged his horse forward. That's right, stranger. The lady is legally married to Mr. Mitchell, and she needs to come with us. The lady is free to make her own choice, John replied. The law doesn't give wives choices, the deputy said. She goes where her husband says she goes. Maria appeared in the doorway behind John, her face pale but determined. I won't go back to him. I won't be beaten and used like an animal. Edward's face twisted with rage. You see what I've been dealing with, deputy? She's defiant, disobedient. The only thing that needs correcting here is your understanding of how to treat a woman, John said. The deputy shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but the law is the law. And who decides what's reasonable? The deputy had no answer. Maria could see the conflict in his face, the struggle between duty and conscience. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said to Maria, but you have to come with us. No, Maria said firmly, I won't go. Edward laughed coldly. You don't have a choice, wife. She's not going anywhere, John said. The third man, the gunfighter, spoke for the first time. Three of us, one of you, Mountain Man. You sure you want to play those odds? I'm sure I want to protect an innocent woman from a man who beats her for sport. Edward's rifle cracked again, the bullet scoring bark from the log where John sheltered. The return shot came instantly. Edward cried out. The deputy cleared his throat. Look, we don't want trouble here. Your law doesn't run in these mountains, John said. Maria saw the calculation in the deputy's eyes, the weighing of duty against personal safety. Maria, the deputy said, trying a different approach. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Except me, Maria replied. I get hurt. I get beaten and used and treated like property. The deputy had no answer. Maria could see the doubt growing in his expression. Enough talk, the gunfighter said. We came here to collect property. His hand moved toward his weapon, and everything exploded into motion. John's rifle cracked, and the gunfighter toppled from his saddle with a cry of pain. The deputy's horse reared as he tried to draw his weapon, and Edward fought to control his mount. Next shot kills, John called out, working the bolt. Your choice how this ends. The gunfighter lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder. The deputy had managed to draw his pistol but seemed reluctant to use it. Edward had his rifle half raised. You shot a lawman's deputy, Edward snarled. That's a hanging offense. I shot a man who was drawing on me. That's self-defense. Maria stepped fully outside, positioning herself beside John. I won't go back, she said. I'd rather die free than live as his slave. The deputy lowered his weapon slightly. Ma'am, please, this doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. It does if you try to force her, John said. Edward raised his rifle, pointing it at John's chest. I'm tired of talking. That woman belongs to me. Edward, the deputy said sharply, lower your weapon. Not nearly far enough. I paid good money for a wife. But the deputy was shaking his head. No more killing. This isn't worth it. The hell it isn't, Edward snarled. Maria watched the confrontation unfold, her heart pounding, but her resolve steady. She would not go back to Edward's cabin. Deputy, she called out, look at me. Really look at me. The lawman turned his attention to her, and Maria let him see the fading bruises on her face. This is what your law protects, she said. Is that really justice? The deputy stared at her for a long moment, then holstered his weapon. I can't do this. I won't be party to sending a woman back to be beaten. Edward's face went purple with rage. You're a coward, Bradley. The deputy turned his horse and began riding away. I never saw you folks. Far as I know, this whole clearing is empty. Edward watched him go, his rifle still trained on John. Doesn't matter, I don't need him. You need to think about this carefully, John said. Your hired gun is wounded. Your lawman has abandoned you. Are you really willing to die for the right to beat a woman? I'm willing to keep what belongs to Mom. She doesn't belong to you. She never belonged to you. And Edward's finger moved to the trigger. Enough philosophy. The shot, when it came, was not from Edward's rifle. Maria had picked up the wounded gunfighter's drop pistol and put a bullet into Edward's shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, crying out. I told you I wouldn't go back, she said, the smoking pistol steady in her hands. I meant it. Edward struggled to sit up, clutching his wounded shoulder. You shot me. You actually shot me. I should have killed you. John moved to collect the scattered weapons. Decision time, Mitchell. You can ride out of here and never come back, or you can stay and see how this ends. Edward looked around the clearing, taking in his wounded companion, his departed deputy, and the two people who had defied him. The calculation was simple. He could fight and probably die, or he could retreat. "This isn't over," he said, struggling to his feet. "I'll be back." "Keep telling yourself that," John said. "But if you come back, you won't leave again." Edward helped the wounded gunfighter to his feet, and together they managed to get mounted. As they rode away, Edward called back one final threat. "You can't watch her every moment, Mountain Man. Someday I'll take her back." The threat hung in the air long after the sound of hooves had faded. Maria lowered the pistol, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "You did good," John said, taking the weapon from her. "Couldn't have handled that better myself. I've never shot anyone before." "You shot him in the shoulder when you could have killed him. That shows restraint." Maria looked at the blood on the ground where Edward had fallen. "He'll be back, won't he?" "Probably. Men like Edward don't give up easily." "Then what do we do?" John shouldered his rifle. "We prepare. We make this place ready for siege." As they entered the cabin, Maria felt a strange mixture of triumph and fear. She had stood up to Edward, had fought for her freedom, and won, at least temporarily. "John," she said as they barred the door, "I'm sorry I brought this trouble to your home." "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble followed you, but it's not your fault. And this is our home now, not just mine." Our home. The words carried weight and promise. That evening, as they sat by the fire planning their defenses, Maria found herself studying John's profile. He was a good man, she realized. A man who kept his word, who protected the innocent, who treated her as an equal. She was beginning to care for him, she realized, not just as a protector or partner, but as a man. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "Tell me about the war," Maria said suddenly. "Tell me what you learned about fighting." John looked up from the map he was sketching. "Why?" "Because we're going to war, aren't we? And I need to know how to win." John set down his pencil and stared into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "The war taught me that good men can do terrible things when they have to. It taught me that survival often comes down to who's willing to go further." "What did you do?" "Things I'm not proud of. Things that kept my men alive, but things that haunt me still." Maria leaned forward. "Will you teach me those things?" "Some of them. The ones that might keep us alive without destroying who you are." Over the next few days, John transformed their peaceful cabin into a fortress. He showed Maria how to prepare defensive positions, how to create fields of fire. He taught her to shoot accurately with both rifle and pistol, drilling her until she could hit targets consistently. More importantly, he taught her to think like a soldier. "Fighting isn't about being brave," he explained. "It's about being smart. You use every advantage you can find. You never fight fair when you can fight smart. What if there is no way out? Then you make sure the other side pays so dearly they wish they'd never started the fight." Maria proved to be a quick learner. Her hands adapted easily to firearms. Her mind grasped the tactical concepts John taught her. "You're getting good at this," John said after she put 6 shots through the center of their target. "I have to get good at it. Edward won't give me another chance to miss." They also prepared the cabin itself, reinforcing doors and windows, creating firing ports, stockpiling ammunition. John showed her escape routes through the forest. "The goal isn't to die heroically," he said. "It's to live, to serve them, to make them pay for coming after us." As they worked, Maria found herself learning more about John. He had been a sergeant in the Union Army, a man who led from the front and brought his soldiers home alive. "Why did you really come up here?" she asked one evening. "Because I couldn't stand to be around people who called me a hero for doing things that felt like murder." "But you saved lives. You helped end the war." "I killed boys who were fighting for their homes, just like I was fighting for mine. There's no glory in that." 2 weeks after Edward's failed attempt, a lone rider approached. John and Maria watched from concealment as the man rode slowly into the clearing. "Hello, the cabin," the rider called. "I'm looking to parley, not fight." John recognized him as one of the men who sometimes drank with Edward. A rough man, but not necessarily violent. "State your business," John called from cover. "Name's Pete Carson. I've got a message from Edward Mitchell." Carson reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a folded paper. "He wants me to read this to you." Go ahead. Carson began reading in a voice that suggested he wasn't comfortable with his role. To the mountain man and the woman who calls herself Maria Mitchell. You have 1 week to return my property to me, or I will come with enough men to burn you out. This is your final warning. That's it? John asked. That's it. Except he wanted me to tell you he's got 12 men lined up, all willing to fight for good money. Maria stepped into view, her rifle held ready. You can tell Edward Mitchell that his property has a name, and it's not Maria Mitchell anymore. Tell him I'd rather burn with this cabin than go back to his bed. Carson looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I don't think you understand what you're up against. Edward's got serious men this time, not just drifters. These are men who have fought Indians. Then they'll know how to die too, John said. You tell Mitchell that if he wants a war, he can have one. Carson shook his head. You're both crazy. 1 cabin against 12 men? You can't win that fight. Maybe not, Maria said, but we can make it expensive. The messenger rode away, leaving them to contemplate the ultimatum. 1 week to prepare for what might be their final battle. 12 men, John mused. He's serious this time. Are you having second thoughts? Maria asked. About protecting me, I mean. John looked at her with those winter blue eyes, and she saw no doubt in them. I gave my word. That means something, even if it costs me my life. It might cost us both our lives. Then we'll die free, and that's worth something too. That evening, they sat by the fire and revised their defensive plans. 12 men were too many to fight directly, but they might be defeated through strategy. We'll make them come to us, John explained. Force them to attack uphill through prepared positions where we can pick them off one at a time. And if they decide to wait us out, then we use the escape routes, disappear into the mountains, and make them hunt us on our terms. Maria studied the map, memorizing each position, each route. John, if we don't survive this, I want you to know something. What's that? These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. For the first time, I've felt like a real person, not just property. John reached across the table and took her hand. Maria, if we survive this, would you consider staying? Not just as partners, but as something more. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and hope. Maria felt her heart race, not with fear this time, but with something she'd almost forgotten. Yes, she said simply, I'd like that very much. John squeezed her hand gently. Then we better make sure we survive. The week passed quickly, filled with final preparations and quiet moments that might be their last together. They spoke of the future they might have, the life they could build together if they lived through the coming battle. On the 7th day, as the sun set behind the mountains, they saw the glow of campfires in the valley below. Edward had come with his 12 men, and tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Are you ready? John asked as they made their final checks. As ready as I'll ever be, Maria replied. Remember, the goal is survival, not heroics. If things go bad, you run. Not without you. If I fall, you run. Promise me. Maria met his eyes, seeing the love and concern there. I promise, but you'd better not fall. John smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the ultimatum arrived. I'll do my best not to disappoint you. As they settled in to wait for dawn, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place. 3 weeks ago, she'd been Edward's beaten wife, property to be used and discarded. Now she was a woman with a rifle, ready to fight for her freedom. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it as herself, not as someone else's possession. That alone made the fight worthwhile. Dawn came gray and cold, with mist rising from the valley below. Maria watched from her position as 12 riders emerged from the tree line, spread in a rough line across the clearing. Edward rode in the center, his wounded arm in a sling, but his rifle held ready. Maria, he called out, last chance to come peacefully. After this, there's no mercy for either of you. We gave you our answer, John replied from his own position. If you want her, come and take her. Edward raised his hand and his men began to advance. They moved with the discipline of experienced fighters, using cover where they could find it. Professional soldiers, John murmured to Maria. This won't be easy. The first shots came from the attackers. Probing fire meant to test their defenses. John and Maria held their fire, waiting for better targets. "Remember," John called softly, "pick your shots. Make every bullet count." Maria sighted down her rifle barrel, tracking one of the advancing men. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. The man she was tracking broke from cover, running toward a fallen log. Maria led him slightly, squeezed the trigger, and watched him tumble to the ground. "Good shot," John said, his own rifle cracking as he dropped another attacker. The assault faltered as the attackers realized they were facing competent marksmen. 2 men down in the first exchange was not what they'd expected. "Fred out," Edward shouted. "Circle around behind them." But John and Maria were ready. They'd prepared secondary positions, fallback points that would allow them to cover multiple approaches. As some of Edward's men tried to flank them, they found themselves caught in crossfire. Another man fell, then another. Edward's force was down to 8 men, and they hadn't even reached the cabin yet. "This is costing too much," one of the attackers called out. "Mitchell, you didn't tell us they were this good." "Keep fighting," Edward snarled. "I'm paying you well enough." But Maria could see doubt creeping into the attackers' movements. They were taking casualties without inflicting any, fighting people who knew the ground and had prepared for their arrival. The attack resumed, but with less enthusiasm. The remaining men advanced more cautiously, showing less willingness to expose themselves to accurate fire. Maria found herself settling into the rhythm of battle, the cycle of aim, fire, reload, relocate. Her fear had transformed into cold determination. These men had come to drag her back to slavery and abuse. She would kill as many as necessary to prevent that. Her next shot took down a man who'd been trying to work around to their blind spot. John's rifle spoke again, and another attacker crumpled. 6 men left, not counting Edward himself. "This is madness," one of the survivors shouted. "They're picking us off like rabbits." "Stand and fight," Edward roared. "She's just a woman and he's just one man." "One man who shoots like the devil himself," another voice replied. "And that woman's no amateur either." The attackers tried a coordinated rush, all 6 remaining men breaking cover simultaneously and charging the cabin from different angles. It was a desperate tactic, but it might have worked against less prepared defenders. John and Maria were ready for it. They'd practiced this scenario, coordinated their fields of fire to cover just such an assault. Maria took the men coming from the left, while John handled the right side approach. Her rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, dropping 2 men in their tracks. John's more experienced shooting accounted for 2 more. The remaining 2 attackers reached the cabin walls, but found themselves facing prepared positions they couldn't overcome. One man tried to break through a window and met Maria's rifle barrel at close range. The other attempted to force the reinforced door and found John waiting with a pistol, and then it was over. 11 men lay dead or wounded in the clearing, and only Edward remained, sitting his horse at the edge of the tree line. "Maria," he called out, his voice cracking with rage and desperation. "Look what you've done. Look at the blood on your hands." Maria stepped into the doorway, her rifle held ready. "I see men who came to drag me back to slavery. I see the price of trying to own another human being." "You're my wife. The law says you belong to me." "Your law is wrong, Edward, and you're not man enough to enforce it." Edward's face twisted with fury. He raised his rifle, pointing it directly at her, and Maria saw his finger move to the trigger. John's shot took him from the saddle before he could fire. Edward hit the ground hard and lay still. The clearing fell silent except for the moans of wounded men and the nervous whickering of horses. "Is it over?" Maria asked. John emerged from the cabin, his rifle still ready, and moved carefully among the fallen men. Some were dead, others wounded but no longer a threat. He collected their weapons, then returned to Maria's side. "It's over," he said. Maria felt her legs go weak as the adrenaline faded. John caught her as she swayed, holding her steady. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it. You fought like a veteran soldier." "I fought like a woman who refused to be property." They stood together in the doorway, looking out at the evidence of their victory. It had been costly, bloody, final. But it had also been necessary. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "Now we bury the dead, tend the wounded, and send the survivors away with a message. What message? That some things are worth fighting for. That freedom isn't free, but it's worth whatever it costs. The cleanup took most of the day. They buried Edward and the other dead men in a grove beyond the clearing. The wounded survivors were patched up and sent away with stern warnings never to return. As evening fell, John and Maria sat on their cabin porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The battle was over, the threat ended, but the future remained uncertain. The territorial authorities won't like what happened here, John said. They might send more men. Then we'll deal with them too. It might mean leaving this place, starting over somewhere else. Maria considered that possibility. This cabin had become home to her, the first real home she'd ever known. But home wasn't really about the building or the location. As long as we're together, she said, I can start over anywhere. John took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Maria, I meant what I said before the battle. If you'll have me, I'd like us to be more than partners. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. Marriage, if that's what you want. But even if not, I want us to be together. Maria thought about marriage, about the legal bonds that had made her Edward's property. But she also thought about choice, about freely given consent, about partnership between equals. Yes, she said, but not the kind of marriage I had before. I want to be your wife, not your property. You could never be anyone's property. You're too strong, too independent, too magnificent for that. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd started as a frightened woman running from an abusive husband. She'd become a fighter, a partner, someone capable of defending herself and others. Most importantly, she'd become free. 3 months later, Maria stood in the same clearing where the battle had taken place. But now it looked completely different. The graves were covered with wildflowers. The bloodstains had been washed away by autumn rains, and new growth was already beginning to reclaim the scarred earth. She wore a simple blue dress, one of several John had ordered from the general store in the valley town. Her hair was braided with ribbon, and her face glowed with health and happiness. The bruises were long gone, replaced by the golden tan of someone who spent her days working outdoors. John stood beside her, dressed in his best shirt and jacket, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. Between them stood Pastor Williams, who had ridden up from the valley to perform the ceremony they'd requested. Do you, Maria Hernandez, take John Parker to be your husband, to love and honor in partnership and equality, for as long as you both shall choose to remain together? The words were different from the traditional vows, modified at Maria's request to reflect the kind of marriage they wanted to build together. Not ownership, but partnership. Not submission, but equality. I do, Maria said, her voice clear and strong. Do you, John Parker, take Maria Hernandez to be your wife, to love and protect as your equal partner, for as long as you both shall choose to remain together? I do, John replied, his winter blue eyes warm with love and commitment. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. John's kiss was gentle and reverent, nothing like Edward's rough demands. It spoke of love freely given and received, of respect and partnership and hope for the future. The small gathering of witnesses applauded. They'd invited a few neighbors from the valley, people who had come to respect the couple who'd fought so hard for their freedom. Even Deputy Marshal Bradley was there, having become something of an ally after witnessing Maria's courage. The celebration was simple but joyful. Maria had prepared a feast from their garden and preserved stores, and John had brought out a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. As the sun set over the mountains, they danced to music played on a borrowed fiddle, surrounded by friends who understood what their victory had cost. Later, after the guests had departed and they were alone in their cabin, Maria and John sat by the fire and talked about their future. Any regrets? John asked. About what? About the violence, the killing, the way we had to fight for this. Maria considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Edward and his men chose violence over accepting my freedom. But I don't regret defending myself, and I don't regret the outcome. The territorial government has decided not to pursue the matter, John said. Deputy Bradley's report made it clear that we acted in self-defense. And if they had decided differently, then we would have faced that too together. Maria leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security of his presence. John, do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't run that day? If I'd stayed with Edward and tried to endure? You wouldn't have survived it. Men like Edward don't stop until they destroy what they're trying to control. And you? What would have happened to you if I hadn't stumbled into your clearing? John was quiet for a moment. I think I would have stayed alone until the loneliness killed me. You saved my life as much as I saved yours. We saved each other. Yes, we did. As winter settled over the mountains, Maria and John fell into the rhythms of married life. They worked together during the day, tending their animals and maintaining their home. In the evenings, they read to each other, planned improvements for the spring, and talked about the children they hoped to have. The isolation that had once been John's refuge became their sanctuary, a place where they could build a life free from the conventions and restrictions of the outside world. Maria learned to love the mountains, to read their moods and seasons, to find beauty in their harsh grandeur. She also continued to practice with her weapons, maintaining the skills that had won their freedom. The rifle and pistol hung above their fireplace, not as decorations but as tools that might be needed again someday. Do you think we'll have to fight again? She asked John one snowy evening. I hope not, but if we do, we'll be ready. Together. Always together. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Word of their story had spread throughout the territory, inspiring other women trapped in abusive marriages, encouraging men to stand up for what was right. They received letters from people they'd never met, thanking them for their courage and asking for advice. Maria found herself becoming something she'd never expected to be, a symbol of women's strength and independence. The frightened mail-order bride who'd fled into the mountains had become a legend, proof that even the most powerless person could fight for freedom and win. I never wanted to be famous, she told John, as they read through another batch of letters. You're not famous for wanting attention. You're famous for doing what was right, regardless of the mata. We did what was right, and yes, we did. One letter particularly moved them both. It was from a young woman in Kansas whose father was trying to sell her to pay his gambling debts. I read about you in the newspaper, she wrote, about how you fought for your freedom and won. It gives me hope that I can find my own way out of this situation. Thank you for showing me that women don't have to be property. Maria wrote back immediately, offering practical advice and emotional support. It was the beginning of a correspondence that would last for years. You're making a difference, John observed as Maria sealed the letter. We're making a difference. This isn't just my story anymore. As their first anniversary approached, Maria reflected on the changes in her life. A year ago, she'd been Edward's beaten wife, trapped in a cabin with a man who saw her as property. Now she was John's partner and equal, living in the same mountains but in a completely different world. The external changes were obvious: the comfortable home, the successful partnership, the respect of their neighbors, the growing reputation as people who stood up for justice. But the internal changes were even more profound. Maria had discovered her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for courage and determination. She'd learned that she was capable of far more than she'd ever imagined. Most importantly, she'd learned what love really meant. Not the ownership and control that Edward had called love, but the respect and partnership that John offered. Love that made her stronger rather than weaker. Love that celebrated her independence rather than trying to crush it. On their anniversary, they returned to the clearing where they'd first met, where they'd fought their desperate battle, where they'd been married. It was peaceful now, green and growing, showing no signs of the violence that had once stained its soil. Do you ever regret it? John asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. The violence, the necessity of killing? I regret that it was necessary, Maria replied, echoing her answer from that night. But I don't regret the outcome. I don't regret being free. And I don't regret finding you. Finding us. They stood together in the clearing, hands clasped, looking out over the valley that had become their home. The mountains rose around them, eternal and protective, witnesses to their struggle and guardians of their future. What comes next? Maria asked. Whatever we choose, John replied. That's the beauty of freedom. We get to decide what comes next. Maria smiled, thinking of all the possibilities that lay ahead. Children to raise in freedom and equality, a home to build and improve, a community to serve and protect, a love to nurture and celebrate. Most importantly, a life to live on their own terms, free from the constraints that others would impose, guided only by their own values and choices. She had run from Edward's cabin as a frightened victim. She had found John as a desperate refugee, but she stood here now as a free woman, a partner, a fighter who had claimed her own destiny and helped others do the same. It was more than she had ever dared to dream, and it was only the beginning.